And I hope you do. Yeah, you may find something later around here that you can get. Look over at Luke 19th chapter. I like for us to always to bring our Bibles so that you can follow along with me if I mess up, you correct me. How's that? We're going to talk a little bit this morning about a man named Zacchaeus. We're going to start out talking about Zacchaeus. You know, it's easy for us when you know Jesus and you know him, and when he's blessing you and you know he's blessing you, and he's given you the knowledge of his word and the vision of his plan for you, it's easy, if we're not careful, to let the devil start lifting us up to a place where we forget those that don't know. And we forget those that, are out there that don't seem like they want to know. You know, and they don't. They don't. Sinners does not want to know about Jesus until the Spirit of God begins to move on them. And unless somebody's praying, folks, there's no guarantee that the Spirit of God will ever move that heart. But when we begin to pray in faith, then God begins to move on people. Now, this story of Zacchaeus, we want to find out some things about Zacchaeus this morning and about Jesus. Jesus knew him before he got to the tree. Called him by name. Called him by name. And I'm going to tell you something this morning. If you don't know Jesus, he's already calling you by name. Calling you by name. It doesn't make any difference. He doesn't care near as much about where you've been as he does about where he wants to take you. Jesus will never bring up your past if you go to him. He'll just begin to show you your future. Because he loves us this morning more than all of his creation. In Luke the 19th chapter, it says this. And Jesus entered and passed through Jericho. And behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus, which was chief among the publicans, and he was rich. And he sought to see Jesus, who he was, and could not for the press, because he was little of stature. And he ran before and climbed up in a sycamore tree to see him, for he was to pass that way. And Jesus came to the place and looked up and saw him and said unto him, Zacchaeus, you see that? Called him by name. Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I must abide at thy house. I must abide at thy house. How many people know that Jesus does all things on purpose and for a purpose? And he made haste and came down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, they all murmured, saying that he was gone to be guest with a man that is a sinner. Oh my. Oh my. And Zacchaeus stood by and said unto the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of thy goods, of my goods I give to the poor. If I have taken anything from any man by false accusation, I restore him fourfold. And Jesus said unto him, This day is salvation come to this house, for as much as he also is the son of Abraham. For the Son of Man is come to seek and to save that which was lost. To seek and to save that which was lost. Now, the Bible made mention that Zacchaeus, not only was he chief among the publicans, which were tax collectors, but he was rich. Now, I want you to notice that Jesus didn't mention how rich he was. That didn't have anything to do with Zacchaeus. How rich he was, well, it probably did because he was a publican. But the publicans were tax collectors. Not payers, collectors. They said he was chief among the publicans, which means that he had people under him also collecting taxes. Now, the Romans were in charge over Israel then. They were ruling over Israel. And they would hire these people to collect taxes for them for the Roman government. And they had certain taxes levied. But they were real free-handed with the publicans because, again, the publicans were seeing to it that they got their taxes due them. But the publicans, a lot of them was known as thieves because they would overtax the people and keep what was left. And Rome was real lenient on them. They got rich, and Rome allowed it to be so. But they were the IRS of that day. They kind of did what they wanted to do as long as Rome got its tax. And so, by saying that he was chief among them, Zacchaeus knew what he was doing, folks. He had raised up in his position and had become rich. But neither his money nor his position had given Zacchaeus satisfaction in his life. But he heard of a man named Jesus. And I want you to notice how it reads here. And he sought to see Jesus, who he was. He didn't want to just look at Jesus. He wanted to find out about this man. Now, if Zacchaeus had been satisfied in his life, he would not have cared. He had riches, he had position, but it was not enough. And I'm going to tell you this morning, regardless of where you're at in your life, you'll come to a place where it won't be enough because there is a place in your spirit that only Christ can fill. You were created that way. Just created that way. And if we're going to find the joy and the peace, the real joy, the real peace in our life, that place will have to be filled with Jesus. I don't care what else you fill it with, the peace and joy won't come. It can only be filled by Christ. And Zacchaeus came to that place, and he wanted to know about this man named Jesus. Sought to see him, who he was. Not only just to look at him, but to find out. He'd probably heard about people being healed. He'd probably heard about the hungry being fed. Zacchaeus was a Jew, so he had to have known something about the Jewish prophecies. He wasn't living right, but he had to have known something because he wanted to find out about this man named Jesus. Now, in verse 8, we don't know what the conversation was between Jesus and Zacchaeus up to now, but you know Jesus went over to his house. There was some conversation going on here. And somewhere in that conversation, Zacchaeus found something. How do I know that? Because in that verse 8 he said, Zacchaeus stood and said unto the Lord, Behold, Lord, half of my goods I give to the poor. If I have taken anything from any man by false accusation, I restore him fourfold. Zacchaeus came to the place, folks, where he understood that there were some things in his life that needed correcting. He had come to the place where he understood that, oh, Zacchaeus, you're rich and you've got a great position, but there's things in your life that is lacking. And so he began to tell the Lord that he was going to start straightening up some stuff. Not just straightening it on his own, folks. He could have done this all the time. But he's straightening up some stuff because in the presence of Jesus, Zacchaeus also saw Zacchaeus for who he was. And when we begin to see Jesus for who he is, the next thing we will begin to see us for who we are. And it takes that vision both ways, folks. It takes that vision both ways. We have to understand who Jesus is to really understand who we are. And when we do that, we will begin to make a move in our life to change those things that needs changing. Now, in the eyes of the religious crowd, Zacchaeus was one of the lowest among the low. Because Zacchaeus was taken from his own people and making himself rich. They saw him as unfit. But Jesus saw him as the lost needing to be found. See, they began to murmur against Jesus. But Jesus had came for what? To seek and to save that which was lost. To seek and to... Folks, if we're following Jesus, what's our purpose? To seek and to save that which was lost. The Pharisees and the religious order of that day, they had arisen to that point in their life where they felt like they were better than these sinners. They were better. And folks, like I said to start with, if we're not careful, when God begins to bless us and we begin to get the knowledge of Him and we begin to be raised up in the revelation of Him, if we're not careful, we will start looking down our religious nose at people too. Oh, it's quiet. Y'all are quiet as church mice. You heard the poorest church mice, they're quiet too. But people, we have folks that are drug addicts. We have folks in all sorts of immorality. We have hurting people all around us. We better not get to the place to where we can't see them as the lost need to be found. Because if we do, we have lost our purpose for being here in the first place. There is no such thing as they are beneath me. Because sin is sin. And we were all born into sin. Every one of us. There's nobody that's sitting here today that is saved because they deserve to be saved. We're saved because God loved us. Folks, and those that's in the gutters out there today, those that we would count sinners among sinners, are just as precious in the eyes of Jesus as you and I. He died on that cross to bring sinners to Him. Don't ever lose our purpose. Don't ever get to that place to where, like the scribes and the Pharisees, we start condemning folks and condemning those that goes out and gathers those in. They murmured against Jesus for being in the house of a sinner. But Jesus left that house. He left Zacchaeus' house, a house that was housing a citizen of the kingdom of God. He left that house different than what he found it, folks. And he was not nearly as interested in what people thought about him as he was in accomplishing what he was sent to do. That's another thing, folks. The moment the devil can get you all tied up in this mindset, if I do this, what will people think of me? He will strip you of your purpose. Strip you of your purpose. Would you go into a bar if you knew somebody was in there that was needing Jesus? Would you go in there? Unafraid of being seen and what your church family would think about you? Would you? Would you go over to a drug dealer's house if the Spirit of God moved on you to go over there and tell him about Jesus? Would you? Or would we be afraid that some of the church family would drive by and see us and wonder? I wouldn't be afraid any of y'all would. You know what? I wouldn't be afraid nobody else would either. Because I have come to the place in my life, and I hope you've come to the place in your life. I'm not bragging on Jerry Lackey. Jesus brought me here. But I have come to the place in my life. See, I'm too old to die young, so that doesn't, you know. And it's brought me here to where I don't care near as much what people think of me as I do what God thinks of me. See, if I really cared what folks thought of me, I'd move into a mainstream somewhere instead of down here with y'all old cultists. But see, our goal must be, folks, not to see what people, not to be digging in to find out what people can think of, do those things what people will think of, think that we're something. But our goal must be to find the lost and witness to them about Jesus, to find the lost and tell them that Jesus loves them. Should be our number one goal. Now, I'm going to tell you something, folks. It doesn't make any difference what you do in the world or what the world thinks of you now. In 2 generations, they won't remember who you are. They won't. In 2 generations, your memory will be gone unless you have left people behind you still carrying on the message of Jesus because you got to them. See, my father's name was Charlie Lackey. Zach's heard the name, but he can't tell you nothing about Charlie Lackey because he don't know him. You don't know him. So if we are trying to make ourselves something, keep that in mind. 2 generations, nobody will care. But if you leave something behind you that Jesus gave you, if you impart that to somebody, folks, it'll live forever. It will live forever. We've got people in this Bible. We could talk, we say Paul, and everybody knows who you're talking about. Peter, John, James. They know. You know why? Because they stood for Jesus. That's why. There was thousands in that same period that didn't stand for Jesus. Who are they? How many people still remember them? Something to think about. It's something to think about. But Jesus went right into Zacchaeus' house, a publican, and everybody knew more than likely he was a thief. But he went right into his house, fellowshiped with him, made Zacchaeus see who he was and what he needed. And Zacchaeus came away a child of God. We must make a difference, folks, while we're here. We must. And the difference that we make must be to those that don't know Christ, not only just to hold each other up, but to reach them with Jesus. Have an answer for the hope that's in you. Committed. Committed to Christ means more than coming to church on Sunday. Doesn't it? And we do our best preaching, not when we're talking, but when we're walking the walk. The best preaching that we do is when we're not just quoting Bible verses, but we're reaching out to those that's hurting and showing them somebody cares. Hallelujah. Do we really care this morning? I know you do. I know you do. Another instance, we find them all through the Bible, where religious people got all bent out of shape with Jesus, is over in Mark 14. And you can notice as you read about Jesus, he did a lot of things that upset the religious folks. He upset religious people a lot more than he did the common folks. But because, see, we have the tendency to look at the struggles and the trials in people's life and identify them with their struggles and not who they are. Don't we? We will identify them with their battles instead of identifying them as a child of God who is lost. But when we see them as a child of God, folks, and begin to identify them as a child of God, one that Jesus died for, then we will begin to feel their pain and feel their trials and reach out to them. I mean, look how we talk. When we see somebody on drugs, we say he's a drug addict. Don't we? She's a prostitute. No, They're sinners that needs Jesus, but they're children of God who has got off on the wrong track. We cannot define people by the trap that the devil has them trapped in. If Jesus had done that, Zacchaeus would have died lost, more than likely. An old tax collector. Hey, let's face it. It takes something to love the IRS. You got to really be on your game. But Jesus loved him. Called him down out of the tree. And went over to his house. And brought salvation to that house. Now in Mark 14, we'll start about the 3rd verse. And this story is told in 3 of the Gospels, and there's a little difference in all 3 of them, but we're going to read this in Mark. And being in Bethany, in the house of Simon the leper, as he sat at meat, talking about Jesus, there came a woman having an alabaster box of ointment, of spikenard, very precious, a very expensive thing in those days. And she broke the box and poured it on his head. And there was some that had indignation within themselves and said, why was this waste of this ointment made? You see that? She just wasted it on Jesus. For it might have been sold for more than 300 pence and have been given to the poor, and they murmured against her. And Jesus said, let her alone. Why trouble ye her? She has wrought a good work on me. For you have the poor with you always, and whensoever you will, you may do them good, but me you have not always. He was about to go to the cross, not far from here. She has done what she could. She has come aforehand to anoint my body to the burial. She's done what she could. Verily I say unto you, wheresoever this gospel shall be preached throughout the whole world, this also that she has done shall be spoken of a memorial of her. One of the Gospels, it talks about that, they said, he couldn't be a man of God because if he was, he would know what kind of woman this was. I don't think he cared. I don't think he cared. Because even as a sinner, she came to Jesus. And if you're a sinner this morning, you can't be at a better place than coming to Jesus. And it says Simon in the house of Simon the leper. Now, Simon, you ever thought about that? A leper. It didn't say a leper that was healed. It said he was a leper. Why wasn't he healed? And if you'll read all those stories in the gospel, you'll find out that Simon was a Pharisee. He had Jesus over because he was curious. A Pharisee. He didn't believe in Jesus. So he stayed a leper. I can't find where he was ever healed. You can stay where you're at if you want to. But we don't have to stay where we're at. We get the presence of Jesus. All we need to do is accept what he has for us. And what he has for us, folks, is deliverance. Deliverance. But they said, why is she wasted this? This is just so wasteful. We could have put this to a better use. Jesus said, you have your opportunities to help the poor, but I'm not going to always be here with you. Now, when I studied this, I thought about a lot of people that we've elected into our government. If it wasn't so sad, it'd be laughable. Have you ever noticed when people that's been in government for years and somebody shines a light on some kind of corruption, they'll stand up and say, we're going to do something about this. Been there for years and done nothing. Or let a congressman start to run for the president, as we got now. And all of a sudden, boy, they're a champion to get things fixed. Where have they been? They're looking at this arm and saying, well, we could give that to the poor. Well, how much have they gave to the poor? What have they done before then? Now, folks, I don't care what good works you're doing. If it doesn't start with Jesus, you're just running in place. A lot of folks doing good work, but it's not starting with Jesus. If the foundation is not Jesus, you're still missing the point. See? And I read a commentary one time that said, right after that, it talks about Judas began to plot within himself how to betray Jesus. And the man's idea in the commentary, like I say, it's just his idea, but it could have been so, said that when Judas saw this waste, he decided Jesus wasn't who he said he was. And started just to say, well, I'll just betray you. Because, look, he just let that woman waste that. We could give it to the poor. But Judas was stealing from the till all the time. In the back of Judas's mind, he was probably saying, why, I could have got some of that. I could have had some of that. And I'm going to tell you what, folks, that's the way the devil works among people. And I'm just going to say this. I was in a church one time. And the board, all y'all know about the board? The church board decided how much that they were going to pay the pastor. And it was a certain amount of the tithes. That's what they were going to pay the pastor. But at that moment, there wasn't but a handful of people there. I was on the board at that time. Wasn't that many folks there? So the pastor, and look, if you're pastoring, whatever you're doing, if you're doing it for the money, get out. Amen. Get out of the business. But I'm telling you, when the church began to fill up, first thing you knew, we had a church full. And the tithes was now the tithes was building. We had a call meeting of the board. Wait a minute now. Do you realize how much we're giving the pastor? We're going to have to cut this. Well, that ain't what we agreed on. I got off the board. Because, I wasn't very well liked. I told the board, I don't care. I don't care how much the pastor's making. As long as people is coming and getting saved. I don't care. And we agreed on this much, and I don't care how much it gets. If God is blessing, leave it alone. See? But we look at things of God in a different way than we look at things of the world. If a drug dealer pulls up in a Cadillac brand new, the world's like, oh, he's successful. If a preacher pulls up in a Cadillac brand new, they're like, he's robbing those people. They will. They will. And y'all know around here, folks, where I stand. I don't believe in fat preachers when the sheep are starving. Amen. I don't. But I'm not going to cut my blessing off to anybody. If God says bless them, I'm going to bless them. See? But she came in, this woman came in with this alabaster box. And she poured it on Jesus and anointed him. And they got all bent out of shape. Because what she had done for Jesus. Just wasteful. Just wasteful. But Jesus said, wherever this gospel is preached, she's going to come up for what she's done. She'll come up as a memorial for what she's done. Judas went, betrayed Jesus. I guarantee you this woman is preached as a hero all over the world many, many, many times. Judas wanted some of that money, and he's still a traitor all over the world, all of the time. Folks, what you do for Jesus, what you do for Jesus will stand. Now, the point we're trying to make here, folks, all the way around, that Jesus himself did not come for the righteous, but for the sinner. And no matter how bad the sin might smell to us, we cannot be so religiously repulsed that we don't reach out to the sinner. I ain't going around them kind of folks. Well, what kind of folks are they? They're just lost people that need saved. And right here in our community, a few years ago, I heard a man who was going to that church at that time. They were getting together to go out. If I called the names, you would know who they were. But they were getting together to go out to visit. And somebody brought up this family's name. And they were a pretty rough family. And they had some church folks say, if y'all bring them in here, we're leaving. If y'all bring them kind of folks in here, we're leaving. So they didn't. But them kind of folks went to another church and got saved. See? They went somewhere where somebody loved them anyway. And told them about Jesus anyway. When we start talking about them kind of folks, we need to stop and think about what kind of folks were we? What kind of folks would I be without Jesus? And I can tell you, it wasn't very pretty. I was a good sinner. That's an oxymoron, isn't it? But when I was out there in sin, folks, if it entered my mind to do it, I did it. You know why? Because I was a sinner. That's who I was. But somebody prayed for Jerry Lackey. Somebody witnessed to Jerry Lackey. And Gloria Jones, she was a pastor at Talladega at that time, got up in the pulpit one morning, I wasn't in church, and called Jerry Lackey. And about 7 or 8 miles from that church, the Spirit of God moved on Jerry Lackey. Was there anything in my life that would make folks want me to be part of their church? No. No. But they loved the sinner. And the Spirit moved on the sinner. And so whatever we do, folks, it doesn't make any difference what it looks like to the world. And it doesn't make any difference what it looks like to church people. Whatever we do for Jesus will turn out good. You know why? Because there's no power that can stop His. When we begin to put things in Jesus' hands and Jesus begins to work, it will turn out good. But you see, Jesus did this all the time. He went around all the time upsetting the religious folks by reaching out to those that wasn't religious. Do you understand? Do you realize that one of His apostles was a tax collector? Yeah. He hired the IRS. And he wrote Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew. He went right down to and found old Matthew sitting out there at the street. The Bible said at the receipt of custom. In other words, he was sitting out there grabbing the tax money as they came by. And he didn't say, Matthew, you better straighten yourself up. You know what he said? Follow me. And Matthew left his well-paying job and followed him. And how many has the words of Matthew stirred since then? I don't know. But Jesus took a bunch. Jesus took time to call a thieving tax collector into the ministry. He took time one time to call a Christian killer into the ministry. Paul was killing the Christians. And right in the middle of it all, Jesus said, I got to work for you, Paul. So don't you start looking past people that are not saints, trying to find somebody to witness to. Because God only sees them as what they could be in Him. On the cross, Jesus died for the whole world. He did. For God so loved the world. Not God so loved the good folks. But God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son. That whosoever, and I guarantee you folks, if you're still breathing, you're a potential whosoever. You're a potential whosoever. Now, every time Jesus would get one of these people, call one of these people that was not really up there in the eyes of the religious folks, not only would they start downing Him, they'd go to the disciples and say, why is your master eating with sinners and publicans? Why is he fooling around with that? You know, they dog him to everybody that they could dog him to. But hey folks, when we get to heaven, a lot of those people that was in those, that right today, that's in those alleys with a needle in their arm, and somewhere in those, you know, out there in the world doing all these things, a lot of those people, when we get to heaven, they'll be there. Because somebody will have taken time to tell them about Jesus. And when we get to heaven, a lot of these people that the Pharisees and all was just dogging Jesus about, they'll be there. And a lot of the Pharisees won't. A lot of them won't. He has called us into a great work. But it's not a work that we can accomplish and keep our hands clean. We talked about that Thursday night in Bible study. You know, you see these pictures of Jesus. He'll have on a white robe and a little shining halo, walking about 3 feet off the ground. That ain't Him, folks. That ain't Him. When Judas betrayed Him in the garden, he had to go kiss Him for the Roman soldiers to know which one He was. He looked just like the disciples. And they were out there, folks, where it was down and dirty. They were. And I told you this before, some of you know this man. I've got a buddy and his wife that was making a living playing music in a bar. And they are good, and they're still good at it. Making a living playing music in a bar. But the Spirit of God, somebody told him, somebody was praying, and the Spirit of God went right into the bar and got them both. The Spirit of God went where a lot of Christians wouldn't go. Went right into the bar and saved them both in the bar. Jesse Duplantis was playing for a rock group. Some of you may have heard this story. And Jesse got saved and came in where they were playing and jumped up on the table and started saying, if you don't find Jesus, you're going to all die and go to hell. And he said the whole band was saying, I don't know what Jesse's on now, but get him. Get him quick. But what he was on, folks, has brought a lot of folks to Jesus since then. Our job is not to look at people with a condemning eye, but to look at them with the love of Jesus and what Jesus has for them. Not to leave them in their sin, not to compromise with sin. See, when we get, so often you get to talking, preaching this kind of a message, folks say, well, he's just wanting to embrace sin. No, I want to embrace the sinner. Sin will still kill you. Sin will still destroy everything around you. And if we love people, we have to tell them that. But you can't go out there condemning them in what they're doing. You've got to go out there and show them a way out. That's like all these folks that's running right up to people and saying, you know you're going to hell? Very likely they do. So what have you just told them? Tell them the way out. Tell them the way out. And I told you that story about my dad. I'm not going back into that. Where a little preacher jumped out and told him that very thing. He was working 6 days a week, and we was living in an old house that you could throw the cat through the floor for the cracks. And I was little, I won't never forget it. And he was out on Sunday cutting firewood because he had to work 6 days a week. And I was too little to cut it. I told it on the porch. But he had to cut enough wood for that week. And the little preacher pulled up, and instead of getting out, offering him anything, he just jumped out and said, did you know you're going to hell cutting wood on Sunday? That didn't go over good. But I have a brother that was in that same shape. And he was cutting wood on Sunday because he had no time either. And the little minister pulled up at his house, not the same one, but another little minister pulled up at his house and said, if I cut you that wood this week, will you come to church on Sunday? That's right. You see the difference? If I cut you the wood, and he did, he cut the wood. And my brother's in ministry today. Been in ministry for years. Don't overlook the next Paul because he looks like a drug addict. Don't overlook, the next great evangelist because he looks like a drug addict, or he looks like a drunkard, or he looks like a thief. Don't overlook him. We've been called into a great work, folks. We need to feel the burden of it. We need to feel the burden of it. We know that Jesus is coming soon. If you don't know it, get with me after church. Because this word will bear this out. Will bear it out. And I know, folks, again, people that's got so skeptical now about a lot of things. And you cannot drag people to Jesus. But you can be a witness before them. And you can have the answers when the Spirit of God moves on them so that they can see. So that they can see. Everybody in this building still has a purpose in God's plan, or you wouldn't be here. God's still got a purpose for you. And that purpose is to love. I don't care what faction of the ministry that God's got you, whether you're a prayer warrior or whatever, but whatever you're called for. The main goal is to bring sinners to Jesus. That's the main goal. So let's pray that God will show us every day the direction that we need to go that day to find who he wants us to find that day, to be a witness to that day. Because sometimes, it ain't in church. Sometimes, most of the time it's not that you don't get to witness to many sinners in church because they don't come. But Walmart's is a great little saving place. Out there on the street you find a lot of folks to talk to, that will talk to you. That will talk to you. Wherever the opportunity arises, folks, don't miss it. Don't miss it. Don't look at people for what they look like, but look at people for what Jesus has done for them, what he could do for them. Is that all right?